Section 3 of Shadow Forms by Manly P. Hall. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. The Teapot of Mandarin Wong. The room was small, but its furnishings were in keeping with the estate of its owner. The walls were richly tapestried, and the subtle odor of the East pervaded the atmosphere. In the middle of this apartment, every drapery of which seemed to enfold Oriental mystery, stood a carved table of teak, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in designs of beasts and birds. In the center of this table was a teapot of rare Chinese porcelain. It was an odd teapot, diamond-shaped, its long spout in the form of a bird's beak. The handle was of twisted rattan. From the air hole in the lid, a thin stream of vapor was rising, and the soft aroma of streaming tea buds, the first picking of the great crop, filled the air. The only light came from a wonderful silken lantern, hung with tinkling bells and cut-glass pendants, which sent a soft shaded glow over the table, leaving the corners of the room in gloom. At the table sat 3 Chinese, before each a tiny porcelain cup filled with the almost colorless tea of China's best. The first was a middle-aged man, the son of Mandarin Wong. He was inclined to be heavy in figure, and his long black coat stretched over a ponderous front. His slanty eyes were gazing at his cup of tea, and his long yellow fingers toyed with the carvings on the tabletop. His face was immobile, and no sound escaped his lips. The second was an older man of slender build with massive brow. His hands were folded in his lap, and the red tassel of his cap, which hung down in front, was aided by his abstracted manner in diverting attention from the snake-like glitter in his eyes. Once he lifted his hand and stroked his black mustache, the ends of which drooped over his mouth. The third member of the group was a man whose wizened features, leather-like skin, and light gray hair told that the years were heavy upon him. In one hand he held his cup of tea, while in the other was a long, thin Chinese pipe. For half an hour these 3 had sat together. No word had passed their lips, while cup after cup of tea alone proved that they were living men, and not statues of ancient wood. They had met for a very important duty. 2 of them had come that justice might fall upon the head of the third, who in the silence of the night had strangled with his cue Mandarin Wong, whose body lay upon a couch a few feet away. One of them had slain this princely Chinese, whose power in the Orient was without limit, whose estates were bordered only by the Great Wall itself, and whose grandsires lay buried beneath the stupendous tomb of the Ming emperors. Mandarin Wong was the last of a mighty line, and now he had climbed to the celestial lands upon the cues of his ancestors, while these 3 sat in silent vigil that the justice of China might be fulfilled. No word passed their lips, no sound broke the stillness, but slowly they sipped their tea, each knowing in his soul that one of them was a murderer. The oldest of the 3 leaned over and poured another cup. Even this motion seemed to startle the other 2, for they moved slightly and seemed to waken as from sleep. Silence again descended as these 3 strange figures remained silhouetted against the surrounding gloom by the pale yellow light from the swaying lantern. Suddenly the stillness was broken by a soft footfall. There was a slight squeaking sound, then a miracle. From his couch of death, buried beneath a wealth of Chinese silk, rose Mandarin Wong. Leaning upon a heavy staff, his frame bowed by the weight of years, the aged Chinese walked slowly across the room and seated himself upon the great carved dragon chair facing his 3 countrymen. They gazed stolidly at the figure and continued to drink their tea, for they knew that the ancient law of China, that the dead walk in the midnight hours to condemn their murderers, was to be fulfilled. Mandarin Wong sat facing them for several seconds, his long fingernails upon the edge of the table. Around his neck was a purple line where the rope of human hair had strangled out his life. His glassy eyes seemed to see nothing, but to all appearance were endeavoring to pierce beyond the skyline of the infinite. Slowly, the Oriental with the drooping mustache reached down to a shelf beneath the table and drew from it a tiny cup of chased porcelain. Filling it from the great teapot, he set the cup with its steaming contents before the shadow of Mandarin Wong. A pin drop could have been heard in the room. The aged Wong bowed his head, and his fingers, laden with jade rings and ornaments of old gold, picked up the tiny cup, and he drank with the 3 living men. With the stoicism of the East, the 3 waited for the condemnation of the one who had been the slayer a few hours before. The trio gazed on the spectre. not even the muscle of an eye moving, as the old man leaned over and with his nimble hands poured another cup of tea. The minutes passed as the four drank from the little cups, while the only audible sound was their low breathing. Suddenly, Mandarin Wong extended his hand and closed it over the handle of the teapot, which was standing on a disc of carved ebony. His long yellow fingers rested upon it. Then slowly, so slowly as to be almost imperceptible, his hand moved, and with it moved the teapot. Softly it turned, its spout directed first to one, and then another, till finally it rested, pointing towards the portly Oriental who sat at the right of the dead man. Then the hand vanished, the shade of Mandarin Wong disappeared in the shadows of the room, and the hush, undisturbed even by breathing it seemed, grew deeper with the passing seconds. The three Chinese still drank their tea. Before them, the empty chair where the spirit of Mandarin Wong had sat. All were staring at the teapot, for they well knew what it meant. The spout was pointed at the heart of the son of Mandarin Wong. The Oriental with the gray hair reached down into the sleeve of his robe and drew from it a wondrous piece of carved ivory, upon which were traced the most delicate flowers with tiny, twisted dragons wound among the blossoms. With his long forefinger and thumb he drew from its superb sheath a fine steel dagger, which he laid upon the tabletop, its blade pointing with the spout of the teapot. Lifting the wonderful porcelain container, he filled his cup again, and sank back in his chair. A few minutes later, having finished this last cup, he rose. With him rose the other two. Crossing his hands in his sleeves, he bowed low to his companions. The Chinese with the drooping mustache folded his arms, while the son of Mandarin Wong inclined his head in dignified salutation. The two men passed slowly from the room, leaving the pot and the dagger on the table. The son of Mandarin Wong sat down in the chair facing the porcelain spout with the flaming bird traced upon it. Taking the dagger in his hand, he played with it for several seconds. A shadow seemed to pass over the room. The lantern swayed. The floor heaved and twisted. The great teapot grew larger and larger before his eyes. Lights danced in many colors, and before him stood the form of Mandarin Wong, his yellow hands upon the teapot lid. Then it grew darker and darker around him. A great blackness descended, and without a sound the son of Mandarin Wong fell forward, his head resting upon the tabletop, in his heart the dagger of justice, driven by his own hand. The gleam of the lantern shone down upon the black-robed form. It fell upon the carvings where his fingers had played but a few minutes before. It shed a faint light over the body which lay upon the teakwood couch nearby, but it gleamed most brightly upon the teapot, whose accusing spout still pointed at the son of Mandarin Wong. End of Section 3.